Welcome back to Fast Market here on the Schwab Network. It's time for cash tags. For that, let's bring in our next guest. That's going to be Megan Brantley, VP of Research at LikeFolio. Welcome back to the show, Megan.
Thanks for having me, guys.
All right, so we're talking Reddit. I mean, the stock's pulled back nearly 50% from those all-time highs we saw just a couple of months ago here, Megan. And, you know, we've heard other companies report, and, you know, Reddit relies on advertising dollars. And it doesn't seem like they've seen a real dent. Some of the other companies, whether it's Google Alphabet or Meta Platforms, we haven't seen a pullback in advertising spend. Is that, a good sign here for Reddit going into earnings?
Yeah, I think that advertising is really key heading into this quarter for Reddit. And Reddit is in a unique position versus a lot of other of these companies that we often compare it to, just because of how its platform is designed and how consumers are using its platform. I would say I would compare Reddit almost most closely to a Pinterest in terms of having a captive audience of consumers who are searching for a very specific topic, have a very specific objective, are looking for more information. But Reddit may even be better because it's so text-based versus an image-based. And I think that this is part of the reason why we've seen such traction in Reddit's advertising. And at least whenever we look at Reddit, I don't have this chart for you, but I do have a stat. I looked at Reddit and I looked at Snapchat because we just saw that report out of Snapchat and we saw a bit of an underwhelming advertising report. But when we look at visits to Reddit's ad platform specifically, just in the last 2 weeks, we have those up about 80% on a year-over-year basis, which is really strong. We had Snapchat's down about 30% in the same period. So I think that there's a bit of a divergence, and a lot of that just has to do with whenever consumers are going to Reddit, they're looking for these recommendations. Ads don't feel quite so intrusive as perhaps other places online where ads might be a little bit intrusive to what the consumer is actually trying to do. So it's going to be interesting to see, will Reddit follow the path of more of a Snapchat or more of a Meta? We put Reddit in the upper echelon when it comes to being attractive to advertisers at large.
Megan, I think the key problem here, because their numbers have been spectacular. Fourth quarter, the revenue growth plus 71%. Their profitability getting better. They still have a negative PE, but they look like they're getting closer and closer as long as, Megan, the big D word doesn't come in, which is decelerating. If things start to decelerate, like growth or that approach to profitability, they're going to punish this name. But they have, their data licensing is pretty high margin. They've got unique ad units that seem to be very popular. They seem to be on the right path. The stock sold off hard, but has come back quite a bit in the last week or so with the rest of the market. If they get a good ad spend number, then they should be fine. But don't let this decelerate, Megan, because they will kill the stock again.
Yeah, I think last quarter, even with the numbers that you talked about with Reddit, the stock still sold off, 14% after earnings because daily active users slipped. That growth wasn't as high as the street was looking. And so whenever we look at this on our front, when we look at just people who are going to Reddit to use the platform, not advertisers, but just regular users, we have that growth at about a positive 17% year over year. And you can see this bunch of users, and I use this because it's tough to compare Reddit versus social media platforms versus search platforms because it's kind of a hybrid. And so this is really a view of where consumers are going to find information. And we overwhelmingly see more and more of them kind of shifting into that Reddit bucket. I will note that that's a smaller bucket versus, say, a Google, obviously, a Facebook, obviously, right? This is a smaller audience space, but it's slowly chipping away and winning over more and more eyeballs. And you want to see that daily active user count grow. So we have it at 17, but you mentioned deceleration, and I will note that this is a bit of a pullback from last quarter. Last quarter, if we had this chart, we would have had Reddit up in the mid-20s. So a bit of a slowdown just in terms of overall engagement. I'll add one more caveat on top of this, is that this is U.S. user base. And so we know that a lot of the growth that Reddit has been logging recently, especially in its user base, has come from international audience. So we're not necessarily capturing that. That international growth could still be very strong. And we know Reddit is doing things, is working on translation to kind of open up its platform to a larger swath of an audience. But we do see a bit of a deceleration when it comes to just overall engagement. So perhaps indicative of that user growth. But we see a nice improvement and a nice consistency in that advertising interest. So a bit of a mixed bag, at least in our data, whenever we're heading into this report.
Yeah, it's about scale here, Megan, as far as the number of users. I'm not surprised they're growing at a faster pace because they're coming from a lower set point here. But when you guys look at data on this and maybe compare it with like Snap or Pinterest, is this platform really hard to monetize advertising dollars? So maybe they're getting more advertising dollars, but they're not able to charge what Netflix charges or Google Alphabet or Meta platforms, just because it's not that platform, that's conducive maybe to ads at this point. Is that going to be a problem for them where they end up being another Snap or something like that?
Yeah, it could be. I think it could be a problem, or it could be an opportunity for Reddit. This is a company that's still pretty early in its monetization strategy, and maybe that's some of the reason that we're seeing some of this uncertainty at play right now. We've seen some major moves in the stock. I think in February it was trading up in the 220s, and then it got down in the 80s. We've seen some massive swings because of that uncertainty and because of the path of, how is Reddit going to evolve? Can it keep up this rapid growth pace? Can it be that really effective advertising beacon? We think that it is well positioned to be a really effective advertising beacon because it has, great first party data and great purchase intent in terms of what consumers are coming to its platform to do. Consumers in many cases are looking for, new gear or a place to eat, or you can see how easily that conversion could happen on an advertising front. So I think the opportunity is there for Reddit, and it's trying to leverage and improve its ad tech. That's been a lot of its new hires of late has been in that advertising technology. So we'll see how things play out this quarter. I will say on our end, it is nice to see Reddit hanging in there, at least from the traction and the consumer interest on web from an advertising perspective versus a Snap. When we saw Snaps being underwhelming, we kind of expected that. So a bit of a different story with Reddit, but it still has a ways to go to compete with, these massive players like a Meta, like a Google.
Yeah, and the impact of AI on Reddit, real quick here before we get your earnings score. If you think about it, AI, without all the ads, without all the noise around a search type of thing, wouldn't that kind of negatively affect Reddit, or are they going to have partnerships within AI to kind of compete in that space?
I think that the partnerships are key. Right now, I think only about 10% of Reddit's revenue is generated from these type of AI partnerships. Because if you think about Reddit, it's a beautiful training ground for large language models that can use all of these posts to understand how consumers speak and refine these models. And so this is a potential avenue of growth and a potential avenue of expansion. It already has partnerships, I believe, with Google and with OpenAI. And so this is, an area of growth, an area of opportunity for Reddit. One of the reasons why we really like Reddit long term, but we're a little more uncertain. Our score falls on the upper end of neutral heading into this event, but I could see a longer bullish case for Reddit, or, you could justify a bet to the upside on some resilient ad spend this quarter.
All right, great discussion, great data as always, Megan. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
All right, that's Megan Brantley, VP of Research at LikeFolio. Kevin, option market pricing in about a plus or minus $15 move in the stock. That's massive.